and today we are going to be talking about 988. So the 988 hotline is a really important hotline, so I hope that everybody's excited to learn about it. We are joined by Leigh Anne McKingsley. She is the Senior Director of Disability and Justice Initiatives for the ARC and oversees the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, a clearinghouse for research, information, evaluation, training, and technical assistance for criminal justice and disability professionals. She has consulted with a number of federal and national agencies, including the Council of State Governments Justice Center, International Association of Chiefs of Police, U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center, or OVC TTAC, and the Vera Institute of Justice. She is passionate about teaching others with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities the value of self-advocacy, speaking out against victimization and abuse, and protecting the rights of people with intellectual disabilities in the criminal justice system, whether they are victims, defendants, or offenders. We are also joined by Jessica Oppenheim and Erica Harris, and together they will be presenting 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Leigh Anne, thank you, Erica, and thank you, Jessica. We're so excited to have you here and to learn about this topic.
Thank you, Erin. We are very excited to be here. This is a topic that we see is happening more throughout the country, with just more interest in 988, wondering how we can use that to keep people out of the criminal justice system that don't belong there. In general, the whole issue around crisis continues to be a growing concern. And what we're really wanting to do from our perspective is work with self-advocacy groups throughout the country to have a better understanding of what people with IDD want when it comes to 988. So our goal here today is just to kind of get to know you a little better, know your thoughts about this topic. And so we're going to start just by talking about what is 988. We're going to show a short little video about it that was local in the area of New Jersey, and then we're going to get your input. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing today. And as Erin said, feel free to put things in the chat. Erin will be checking the chat out, and whenever we're not speaking, we can be checking out the chat too. So if you do have questions throughout, we're pretty informal. So feel free to raise a hand or, come off mute and let us know if you have a question. So I'll get started by sharing my screen. And by the way, Happy New Year. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday time together. Okay, from beginning. There we go. So as I said, we'll be talking about 988, which is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And specifically, being the ARC, we want to talk about how this is affecting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You already heard our little bios about who we are and what we do. So very happy to learn more about you in the next few minutes as well. You know who the ARC is, but just in case, the ARC of the United States has been around many, many years. We're soon to be having yet another anniversary to mark 70 years of, providing advocacy with and for people with intellectual developmental disabilities. And part of that is criminal justice work. And so we have what's called the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, where we get to focus specifically on how people with IDD are involved in the criminal justice system. How are they getting help? What if they are a victim of a crime? Are they able to report crime? What if they are a suspect? Do they know their rights? What kind of training is out there for police? So there's a lot of different things that we want to help chapters of the ARC and self-advocacy groups have a better understanding about. So that's why we do what we do. So as an overview about 988, we wanted to do just a quick little introduction about what it is. So if we look at, wait a minute, is this your slide, Erica? I think I'm going into your slides.
You take it away, Leigh Anne.
No, you do it, please. So I'm going to hand it off to Erica, who's going to give you the overview of 988. Thank you, Erica.
Sure. So, just a little bit of background. I was really interested in kind of co-presenting today with Jessica and Leigh Anne because we get asked about this. Seems to be something we're asked about a lot now. 988. How does it pertain to people with disabilities? What is the difference, and what does that mean? So I was actually learned a lot even by working on this. So the first nationwide 3-digit emergency phone number that we all know is 911. That was actually created in 1968, which was news to me. I did not know that it had been around for so long. But when we look at 988, it was actually implemented in July of 2022, but it was an evolution of its predecessor. So what came before that, which was actually a 1-800 number that started in 2005. So it kind of incrementally grew. The new 988 number, it actually extends to over 200 crisis centers that provide 24/7 service by way of a toll-free hotline. And then those calls are routed to the nearest crisis center for referral to local mental health providers. So that kind of gives you just some information of what happened between 911, how 988 got started. And then in October of 2020, the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act of 2020 was signed into law. And then, as the slide says, in a historic move, Congress passed a bipartisan legislation designating 988 as the first nationwide mental crisis response number or hotline. So there's been some great progress with this, but as we kind of move into how it applies to people with disabilities, we'll see kind of what work there is still to be done. Okay, so what is 988? A lot of us have heard of it, but we don't really know what do we do with it? What is it for? What is it not for? You can call the number or you can text it, and you can actually chat if you go to their 988lifeline.org website. And you can do this for yourself, or you can do it for one of your loved ones, or if you know someone or you're with them and they're experiencing some kind of mental health challenges themselves and they could use some support or some resources in their area, you can call on their behalf. It is the main way to get help for mental health crisis in the United States, so in our country specifically. And like I mentioned previously, it offers 24/7 access, and the people that you are going to connect with on the other end, they are trained crisis counselors in areas of like suicide, mental health, or substance use crisis. If a person is experiencing emotional distress or any other reasons that you really just feel like someone who is a counselor or a mental health professional could work with them as opposed to calling for the police. Okay. So who's it for? SAMHSA, which is short for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they're really responsible for making sure the hotline can help people who face the greatest risk for having a crisis. And 988, if you go to their website or you see any of their marketing, you'll see that they constantly say 988 is for everyone. And they don't designate a specific, category of person, but they really want to promote it to be for everyone. And so the calls may or may not be about suicide. I know for me, my impression was, oh, it's a suicide hotline. But it may or may not be about that. You can use 988 for any mental health struggles, emotional distress, or even if you have alcohol or drug concerns. And if you need to talk to someone, you can call 988 to find a counselor that's local. And what's great is that 988 decreases the calls to the police. So it frees the police up to really handle those law enforcement issues that are not mental health issues. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Erica, can I ask you a
Yeah.
quick question?
Sure.
When you say it's for everyone, is that any age?
It is for any age.
So
Yes.
It can be
Yes.
it could be a teenager or an adult or anybody.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of touch on the slide here, kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, not this one, the next one, is 988 accessible? So I'll kind of jump around here a little bit, but to your point, Jessica, when I was looking into this, they have a whole belonging and accessibility section on their website that I was not aware of. And they go into, it really emphasizes, I see I have my notes here, emphasizes the goal to be culturally competent and for people to communicate in their preferred language without a dominant language. But it goes on and on into being very open to everyone and kind of how we refer to meeting them where they're at. And so I thought that was really great. Of course, as a disability advocate, I would have liked to have seen more disability wording in there. I did not see that so much. They focused on having specific contact centers for Spanish speakers, but they also mentioned deaf and hard of hearing people. So we have that deaf and hard of hearing piece. They like to emphasize that they have translation services in more than 240 languages. So that is great. I mean, we love to see that progression and that inclusion. Like I said, kind of our bias, right, is that we'd like to see more of that disability feature. And as the slide says, you know, people who use TTY can access 988 through a relay service, or they can dial that 800 number. The 800 number does route basically to 988. It can be accessed via chat and text, which is great if you can type and if you can, you know, if you have access to those things.
I do have a question for you about chat to make
Mhm.
sure remember, I'm technologically challenged.
Yes.
So that would be, I would go on the website and one of those live chat people would pop up, and that would be a human I'd be getting, not an AI.
Not necessarily, not
Okay.
necessarily. I actually just chatted with an airline last night, and I'm finding more and more chat features of websites are not a person. It's just like calling. You
That's what I'm
get that robotic phone tree, and you will go round and round, and you have to keep saying customer service to really get a live person.
Get a human.
Now, 988 might be different. I didn't try it because given the circumstances,
I
I would like
understand.
it
I
to be.
wondered about that. Yeah.
Yes. But I don't know. I don't know. But via chat and text, that would be a
What
fun
they
thing to try
said.
out. Maybe I'll
Okay.
try it out as we're on this call. But they also emphasize that 988 can be accessed through video phone service to better serve people who are deaf of hard of hearing. So this is just my general impression, is that some steps have been taken, but I think like a lot of things, it's a longer path that to really make it accessible. And I have here too, just in my notes, that going to the 988lifeline.org website, they must have a button that says ASL now, and then you follow the prompts to go through that conversation with them. So some helpful things, and I'm glad to see that it's making progress, but I think, you know, I think as we go on that it'll get better.
Thank you,
All right.
Erica. That's a really helpful overview, and I'm glad that you took the time to research the accessibility issue. I kind of liken it like it's similar to what the work we've done like with RAIN or like the National Sexual Assault Hotlines, where we're asking questions about how is this really accessible for someone with a cognitive disability? Or, you know, some type of developmental disability. Are you changing things, or maybe how you ask questions, maybe slowing down? What are you doing differently to make that hotline more accessible? So this is very similar, right? It's a mental
Very
health
much.
hotline.
You know, you've
Right,
just
very
raised
much.
something that I think you're probably going to come to in a bit, but while I'm thinking about it, as you're talking, as the person on the phone thinks, how can I accommodate this person's needs? Does the person who calls, do they have an obligation to say, I have a disability and this is what it is?
Right. I don't think there's any
I don't
obligation,
think
just like there
so.
isn't in general. So,
Not general, right. People
right.
have asked that about doctor's appointments or getting pulled over by the police. Is that burden on them, or is it on the professional to assess and to make that determination?
Yeah,
So,
under the ADA, it should not be on the person. So I do
correct.
want to make
That's
sure
right.
anybody who might be listening to this knows you don't have an obligation to tell them you're a person with a disability or what that disability is or describe it for them. You can. It's voluntary, but I like to think that the folks who answer the phone are trained. and
Well,
what
that's a whole nother issue, and that's why,
decisions. And I know that's why I didn't want to go too far because I know we've got some additional slides on this, but since
yes,
you were talking about accessibility here, it made me think about what the obligation was of the person having a
absolutely.
crisis.
And typically what we say in our trainings from our center when we're training police or people that work hotlines, that kind of thing, is that a person can ask for support. So they may not want to reveal their disability, but they can say, well, I need help with understanding what this means, or understanding what it means if I report, or I need you to talk slower. I need something that's not just in writing. Here's the things I need, without having to disclose a certain type of a disability. So there are ways to get what you need. And that's just really important, because if you're in a mental health crisis and you're scared to call police, you need to be able to access something like 988 so you feel a little safer calling for help. But if you don't know that you will be understood if you call that line, or there's even more misunderstandings because that hotline person doesn't understand disability, that's going to keep people from feeling okay to call 988. So that's why we want to have webinars like this to hear from you. What would make you feel more comfortable? What is it that you need when you might have to make that phone call? So we're going to be thinking about that, because in the next few slides, we're going to be talking about that a little more and asking you to jump in and share with us what you think on that.
And Leigh Anne, if we have time,
Yeah.
I did just chat. I started a chat with 988, so I can follow up
Okay,
and
good.
let you know what I found out.
Ooh, we have in time.
Right.
Real
Real
time.
time.
Yes, real-time updates to provide as we go through this webinar. So
That's
thank you,
right.
Erica.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to talk about is, as Erica mentioned, 988 is thinking about how to make sure they're looking at different populations and what they need. So I wanted to share with you some of the examples. So of course, I want to start out with people with intellectual developmental disabilities. What we do know is that they're not directly addressing people with IDD. So one of the things that we did in a previous webinar is think through, what would we like the hotline operators, the people that take those phone calls, what do we want them to consider? Some of the things we discussed was adjusting the pace of therapy. So if you're going to refer someone to a therapist, you need to make sure that they provide accommodations. Because just referring someone to a therapist who doesn't know what they're doing, never worked with people with disabilities, is not going to be that helpful. So would that therapist, change the pace of therapy? Would they use plain language? Would they make sure that they're providing ADA accommodations? So that's one of the things we wanted hotline callers to consider. And then providing basic IDD education for all 988 operators. So Jessica, you already mentioned this, but do they know about people with intellectual developmental disabilities? How much do they know? Do they think it's the same thing as mental health? Do they even know that there's a difference, right? So we want to think about, how can we teach chapters, teach people with disabilities how to advocate for those kinds of things in their state and in their community. And then there was an example of a program that's looking at doing this in Virginia called the REACH program. So Virginia has what's called the REACH Hotline. It was the first state to pass legislation to fund 988 Hotline. And they have a crisis center system for people with IDD that's called REACH. Again, it offers that 24/7, so always, crisis line and mobile support. But some of the questions that we still had for this type of hotline is, will callers with IDD who dial 988 be connected to this REACH service? So even though there was a REACH service out there, like a crisis system, there was still questions about, will people be directly connected to that? Or how will they know that that service is out there? And then how will the 988 operators identify people with IDD? So this comes back to Jessica's question is, do they have to say they have a disability? So there can be questions that those 988 operators can ask. They don't have to directly ask, do you have a disability? They could say, have you received services somewhere? Is there something we can do to help this be more accessible? How can we help you do that? So there's other questions that can be asked, but you can see why it's important that you're involved in that, because people with lived experience themselves know best what those questions should be and how we need to be training 988 operators. So again, we'll be opening it up for discussion here in a few minutes. Another population that they're thinking about are youth. And Washington State provided funding that was received from the American Rescue Plan Act. And it actually gave money to what's called mobile crisis teams that are for youth and young adults to respond to 988 calls. So the plan actually included 6 children and youth mobile crisis teams. So what they're doing is they're taking this team, it's called a mobile crisis team. And so when someone calls the police, and it's something that's more like a mental health call, then they can direct it to a mobile crisis team, which is a much better way to handle things. A big reason why 988 is so important is because too many calls are going to police, and then the police don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. And then it actually makes things worse because they don't know the person has a disability. And that's why we get so many calls about people needing help. So 988 is finally a chance for us to say, look, we don't need police here. We need people, maybe a youth who's had experience and they can talk to another youth. Or we need a person with a disability who understands and they can talk to another person with a disability when they're having a mental health challenge or what they're calling a crisis situation. So what's so great is that 988 is already kind of doing this with certain populations, like with youth, but they're not doing it for disability. They're not looking at this from a disability perspective yet. And that's what we're really hoping to work with chapters like yours and self-advocacy groups like yours to really help them understand we need to be doing this with youth as well. I mean, with people with disabilities as well.
Yeah, it's particularly an issue in New Jersey, Leigh Anne, so I'm glad you're talking about this.
Yeah.
If you call 911 here, police will come, regardless of what the call is about. So if you call and say, I have a medical emergency, I need an ambulance, or I need help transporting to the hospital, that will come, but before the ambulance can even get there, a squad car will come. So police always arrive at the scene. And I'm thinking that one of the things that 988 will assist is it'll take some of that burden off police. If the call can be handled by 988, you won't have a squad car at your door. And I think for some families, that's not what they're looking for. It can escalate the situation. It's upsetting. They may choose not to call if they know police will be arriving at their front door. So we're hoping that 988 will alleviate some of those issues.
And that's a big, big deal because really all we've had is 911.
That's right. That's where you
And
call.
that's all we've had. And it's just everything. Like you get police for every single thing.
Yeah.
We've never had a chance to have a different avenue, a different tool to say, this is really mental health related. This is not related to like a typical police call, let's say.
Right. There's
And
no
so,
potential crime occurring.
and it's funded through taxing cell phones. So there's a certain fun way to get funding for it that all states can access. So we've never had enough money to do something different too. So that's why it's been such a big deal, not only in our country, but other countries are doing it. They're using either 988 or another 3-digit number to try to address the mental health crisis in their own countries. And so the same, we're doing it as well. I know Canada has it. I'm forgetting which other ones, but there's other countries as well outside of Canada that are providing this type of a different number to try to stop sending people with mental health challenges to jail and to prison and arresting them. So that's just a big reason why we want to make sure that in that the population of people with disability, like intellectual disability, are not left out of that conversation. We know that many people with IDD also have mental health disabilities too, around 30 to 40%. So having that co-occurring disabilities, we want to make sure that the 988 operators understand that and how often that they may be talking to someone that has an IDD. So another population I just wanted to bring up is LGBTQ population. So there's an effort to offer specialized calls, texts, and chats specifically for this population. There was a pilot program in 2022 focused on youth and young adults from that community. So again, I'm so glad they're thinking about different populations, but like Erica said, there's nothing on disability. So sometimes what we do is we start with where we're at and we say, okay, so yay, you're looking at people who identify as LGBTQ plus, but what about people with disabilities who identify in that community? Are you thinking about, that as well? So that's another thing that especially people with lived experience who have maybe experienced depression and different ways of being discriminated against, that they could bring their own lived experience to talk about how are we helping people in crisis, right, that have an IDD as well. And how could that be kind of brought into the current policies around 988 in New Jersey. So something else to consider. Native Americans, this was also mentioned because of the suicide death rate for people who are Native Americans. Erica mentioned that on the 988 website that they're looking to improve cultural competency. And what's really concerning is that for certain populations, the suicide death rate is so much higher. And it shows that those between the ages of 15 to 19, the suicide rate is more than double that of non-Hispanic whites, more than double. So although 988 is not only for suicide, it is there for anyone thinking about suicide as well. And if we know that certain populations struggle more than others with suicide, then that is definitely a place we should be thinking about how many of those people also have IDD and how are we making sure that this service is accessible to them. So we're going to move on to what do we need to know about 988. And this is where we want to start kind of opening up to get some thoughts from you. In our past conversations around this, we've thought about some key things that we'd like to know. So this might get you thinking about some things that you would like to know as well that you can share with us. One of those is how often are calls being transferred from 911 to 988? So within New Jersey, if someone uses the 911, are those being transferred? How are those being transferred? Kind of what's the protocol around that? How are callers referred to 988? Is it just themselves mostly calling? Is a family or friend calling? Is a healthcare professional calling? And how often do those people call? That can give us a better sense, more data around how accessible we're being as well. And then how often calls are resolved over the phone and how the call was resolved. Now that can give us a lot of understanding about if accommodations are being provided, how are they helping to get something resolved, or how are they not helping because we didn't provide the right accommodations. We also looked at how often mobile crisis units are actually sent instead of police, or as Jessica, you said, it's often police, but then they'll send mobile crisis units as well. And then is that how we want it to happen? Or can it be where there's not police sent? And it could just be mobile crisis units, or maybe the police are part of that unit, but they're not on the scene first. They have the mental health advocate go
Yeah,
first.
we have started a program here called Arrive in some of the counties.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know how it's working, but I have seen the articles in the paper about that partnership between a mental health person and a law enforcement officer coming to the scene together. That's what it's intended to do. Now, how often it's being used, I haven't seen any data on it, but yeah,
Okay.
there is some thought here, like other states, many other states are doing this, we know, to coordinate that response. So an officer will probably show up, but not alone.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's, and a lot of times they may show up without their typical uniform on as well. So
Yeah, if you've got a CI
plain
trained officer
clothes.
or a plainclothes officer who's available.
Yeah. And that can help just right away de-escalate, because it's a little scary when you see
And a squad car shows
yeah,
up.
with their guns and
Problematic.
tasers and all of that. So that's something that we would want to know what's happening as an advocate in your community around that. And then
Right.
how
That's
data
with
is
your
being,
local department.
yes. And then how often police are sent to the scene, but how data about calls from certain populations are being kept. So in New Jersey, when those calls come, are they looking at how often those calls are coming from people with disabilities? And then are they breaking that out to ask, do they have IDD? Do they have mental illness? What kind of disability do they have? And how often are we getting those types of calls? So again, really good data, especially when programs are looking to try to get more funding to have a non-police response in their community. So now we're going to transition to 988 in New Jersey, but I just want to pause here to see if there are any questions. Aaron, I don't know. I haven't been looking in the chat. Is there anything so far from anyone in the chat? Or if you want to come off chat and just ask any questions, we'll just do a short pause here to give you that chance.
I don't see any questions. Also, if someone thinks of questions afterwards, I can always forward them over as well. So if for some reason, if you're like me and after the webinar is when you think of all the questions, please feel free to reach out and we can definitely get those answered for you.
Great, thank you.
Leigh
So,
oh,
go ahead.
can I just give you a quick update on the 988 text?
Please, yes.
Okay, so I texted and I just said hello. Then I got a response. It says, welcome to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We're here to help you by continuing to text. You agree to the terms, reply stop. And then they have something in Spanish, which probably means reply this word in Spanish. And then the next one says for LGBTQI plus youth/young adult services, type pride. And then the next one says for veterans and service members, send a text to, and they have a separate number. And then it says, or type next to continue. So I typed next to continue, but I was interested that they had those 3-4 groups, specified. It says to help your counselor support you, please share if you have had thoughts of suicide. Reply A, B, or C. So A was yes within 24 hours, B was yes within 2 months, and C was no. So I said no, I said C. It says, thank you. On a scale of 1 to 5, how upset are you? And 1 is I'm okay, 5 is extremely upset, and I just put 4. And it says a counselor will be with you shortly. While you wait, please do this brief survey to help them support you. So they send a link, but I didn't fill it out. And then I got a person that says, hi, my name is Rohan. I'm here to listen and support. What has been going on? So I told him who I was and why I was typing. And I said, specifically, I am curious to know if you are a real person or a bot. He says, oh, yes, I am a real person. I work as a volunteer. I said, are all responders volunteers? He says, I don't actually know that information, but I know that we have other trained staff. And I just said, okay, thank you. I didn't want to hold him up. And he says, of course, I hope the training goes well for everyone and have a good day. So that was That was
Oh,
it. So it's a
good.
real
Thank you,
person.
Erica.
It starts out with some screening questions, but then it's a real person. So
But you
good to
did
know.
ultimately get a human. It
Yeah.
sounds
And
Yeah.
rather quickly too. It was like within 2
Okay.
minutes. It
Okay.
wasn't, I was checking the time. Yeah.
I was actually reading in another state, oh gosh, and I'm not remembering which one, as we were preparing for this webinar, where their response time was just super quick. So it does depend on the state that you're in. But that's a good thing to know, how quick is your response rate, but also the fact that right when you go into their system, they're asking about different populations. That's where I think we should be saying, do you have a disability? So that we can make sure people, I mean, we're talking about this whole 988 was created for people with a disability, but we never actually specify that there's
Right.
other disabilities than mental health.
For sure.
And that's
for
where I
sure.
think, given
Especially
how
if they're
often,
asking those questions right off the bat. I mean, that's
right,
great, especially given what you just went over in your slides about LGBTQ and, you didn't
Youth.
mention veterans, but also youth. And
Veterans,
it's
yeah.
great that they're making that distinction, but overlooking a large population as
Yes.
well.
Yeah, the largest population that
And
is
that,
a minority population in the country.
right. And while those populations have very specific needs and issues related to them, disability, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but disability may affect your ability to communicate. So
That's
right
right.
there, just getting information from that person, asking the yes or no question if you have a disability can really help frame how they move forward and how they properly assist them. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
So thank you so much for doing that, Erica. That's a great exercise. And now we know, and we may have to follow that up with some more later to
Yeah.
think about how we can maybe help change some of those entry points and bring more focus on disability.
Sure.
So that was great timing to share that as we look at this next thing, which is a video. So 988 had its 1-year anniversary in 2023 in New Jersey. And the video here is talking about how a lot of people did use the new 3-digit suicide prevention lifeline in its first year. But what we're wanting to do is show this video so you can kind of think about what's going on in New Jersey, and maybe it will help spawn some ideas as you listen to it or watch it.
As the new 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline marks 1 year in operation, an increasing number of people are using the hotline. But a study from the National Alliance on Mental Illness shows many Americans still don't know about the 988 number. Senior correspondent Joanna Gagas reports from one of the state's call centers.
Since 988 launched, calls in New Jersey have increased by nearly 22%.
The state's 988 Lifeline centers are getting between 4,500 to 5,000 calls a month.
It's been 1 year since the National Crisis Hotline 988 launched here in New Jersey. The Department of Human Services held a panel discussion today to hear feedback from some of the folks who handle those crisis calls to better understand what supports they need as they help those who might be ready to take their own life.
Additional resources to be able to provide additional training for more counselors, additional ongoing learning for counselors that we already have.
It's very important work, but it can be emotionally taxing for us. So I think first and foremost, being able to have the staff and the people who are there to pick up these calls and support these people and, avoid that burnout. So we have that time to decompress opposed to, call after call when it's super busy.
Support to get us where they can get some counseling and therapy appointments quickly and in their community.
Those requests heard directly by Department of Human Services Commissioner Sarah Edelman, who facilitated the conversation and outlined some of the next priorities for 988.
The next part of our system is to also build mobile response so that when there is someone who may need some additional in-person support, we have the sort of functionality and capability to respond to people that way.
Right now, only about 85% of the crisis calls that come into call centers are answered here in New Jersey. That means the overflow goes to backup call centers that aren't local. So the state's putting some real money behind expanding its capacity.
We are investing through the Department of Human Services $10 million to help 988 Lifeline centers increase staff and expand technology so they can manage the increased volume of calls, chats, and texts. This is in addition to the $3.7 million in federal funding that centers have received since the transition to 988.
One of the state's 5 call centers, Contact of Mercer County, is able to communicate with people in crisis via chats and texts that come through 988, which is allowing them to reach younger people, a group that's increasingly in crisis.
I remember my first chat. I met with someone who was being bullied and harassed and wanted to take their life because they were being bullied about their sexual identity.
I think especially for young people, it's so important because they feel it's more anonymous and they feel it's more confidential. And so they're much more familiar with technology versus picking up a phone and actually speaking. And I think especially with the crisis for young people, it's so important that they have a friendly medium for them.
And important they know it's there for them when they need it. The state's launching a $3 million public awareness campaign so more people know there's someone on the other line who cares. For NJ Spotlight News, I'm Joanna Gagis.
Thank you, Erin, for playing that. So that provides some context. Now, that was over a year ago. So I will say that there may have been changes since then, certainly. And hopefully more money brought to the kind of the job to make sure that people know about 988. I know, Jessica, you mentioned you saw one sign. So there was some money put into getting the word out in New Jersey, apparently, but I don't know how far that went. But one of the things you might have mentioned in that video is they really didn't talk about disability, people with disabilities. Again, there was a mention about,
yeah, I could see
LGBTQ.
who was at the table. Those were all mental health organizations.
Yes.
So it looks like there's a pretty robust response from that community, but I don't know if that connection has really been made with
exactly
Division
and
of Developmental Disabilities, which is a separate division within the same department.
Exactly. And that is why I wanted to show that because, again, it shows that even though there is this push in New Jersey to understand 988, to bring it out, there's even meetings taking place. People with IDD aren't at the meetings, or maybe the chapters at the ARC have not been invited. Who knows how you get into that circle to kind of bring that voice to this issue, but definitely it's a great way to ensure accessibility for 988 for people with IDD. So let's move on to the polling question, and I'd like for you to answer in the chat. Either in the chat or if you want to come off mute and just let us know your response to this question. So what we were wondering is if people with IDD are being included in 988 planning or any discussions in your state or in your community. I see a thumbs up. Yes, no, unsure, or there are plans to do so in the future. So I'm going to check my chat here and see. That's what I have a hard time doing, is seeing everything at once. So
feel free to type in your answer either in the Q&A box, in the chat box, or if you would like to raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can give us your answer. Or like someone did, you could do a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
I will say that there is one, for those of you who are looking, you'll find a fact sheet on the Division of Developmental Disabilities webpage. It's very similar to the Mental Health and Addiction Services fact sheet, but it does say that it is possible that if you identify as a person with a disability and with those needs, that the person you've called, the contact person, may refer you to DDD. That's its only reference. to people with disabilities specifically in the fact sheet.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And I know Erin, you can go ahead and share that fact sheet if you'd like to, since Jessica mentioned
I
it.
see
so
someone
people-
is saying that they're unsure, which I think that's
Yeah, okay.
probably a universal sense.
I don't think I'm seeing the chats. I don't know.
There's nothing in the chat
It's
right
in
now.
the Q&A. It was in the
Q&A.
Q&A.
Oh, in the
We
Q&A.
put it in
Gotcha.
Q&A.
Okay.
And in the chat, I did put the Department of Human Services 988 webpage as well as the fact sheet. So you
Great.
have 2 links in there if you want to learn more.
And, don't think that if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I should know about this, a lot of people still don't know about 988, whatever state they're in. I don't think it's something that the IDD community is talking about a lot, and that is why we're having this webinar, just to, this is actually one of hopefully more webinars in the future about 988, working with different states. So we can start gathering this information through the ARC and really inform SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, and other of the federal agencies, that they need to be putting more information out there about how to include people with IDD in providing 988 services in the hotline.
Yeah, thanks.
So,
We have gotten a couple of responses in the Q&A, and it's either that they're unsure or don't believe that there's been a really
okay.
An overt interest in including people with disabilities in the process.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
providing those responses. That's kind of what we thought it would be, but it's always good to know from
hopeful.
you. Yes, if that is truly the case. Let's now look at resources, since we've kind of talked about what is 988, what is it looking like in New Jersey, and now here's one online resource that SAMHSA is providing. It's called 988 and People with Neurodivergence. Another way of talking about different types of disabilities. They actually say the word they're using there describes people with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and others. So they're bringing together people with learning disabilities as well as intellectual developmental disabilities, although they don't say intellectual disability, I will say. Specifically, they just said autism. But this was the closest thing that we could find in terms of an online resource specific to people with disabilities. And again, I think they're trying to just use a very broad term to say they're looking for ways to provide some type of help and resources around this. Now, when you go to this website, which, Erin, I think that one of them that I gave you is this one, but I'll make sure that everyone gets this website as well. It does list like a couple of short toolkits that give some direction around how hotline workers might ask questions to people with these types of disabilities. But again, they're really focused on autism is the term that they're using mostly. So there is something out there, I think, that's trying to be developed at this time, or it has been pretty short and to the point, but still it offers something to look at when thinking about how to train 988 hotline. So we'll share that as a resource that you can look at, and something to think about how you could make it more specific to your state. But we at the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability would also love to work with the ARC of New Jersey and your self-advocacy group on that, if that's something you're interested in, to create something more specific to your area. So that is all that we had. I see that we're pretty good on time. We have plenty of time to open it up for questions if you would like. We also have our contact information with our email if you would like to reach out to any of us directly. We're always here for any questions or ideas for how to continue this work. So I will stop share and then hand it back over to Erin Erin, if you wanted to add anything to, or anything you know about 988, because I know you and I have been having this conversation too.
I do have a question. I'm interested in knowing, for those who have attended today's webinar, if you knew about 988 before this webinar. Jessica is in New Jersey, and Jessica and I have talked about how we don't see a lot of advertisement for it. There's one billboard I saw, and Jessica saw one on the turnpike. So I know it's not getting the awareness it deserves. So I'm just curious if those of you who have attended today have actually heard of 988 before you got on this webinar, or before you registered for this webinar.
And maybe how. I do wonder if
Yeah.
anyone has seen those billboards. As I mentioned, I saw one sign on the Route 1 bridge because I was stuck in traffic. There was a sign on the Route 1 bridge for 988. I see somebody's raised their hand, so I'm curious.
Yeah, go ahead, Marianne. You should be unmuted and able to talk.
So it's been really interesting, hearing everybody's point of view. And of course, because I've been volunteering there,
I
I
can
do
hear it
see
a
the
little.
signs. I'm sorry.
It is hard to hear you. I don't know if you could turn up your volume a little. Mine's turned up all the way.
I wonder if it can be placed in the chat, possibly, if there's a question or a, since we can't hear.
I did hear you a little, Marianne, but it was very, very low. Did you want to try again, or?
Is that better?
Oh, that is better.
Okay. Sorry. Everything crashed on me at once. I'm actually, I work at the Arc of Union County, but I'm also a 988 counselor.
Oh,
So
great.
I've been doing it a long time, and that's why I was interested in, but it's funny because, like, if you talk about, like, that you work at the Arc, people say, oh, well, what is that? But when you work there, you see it everywhere. I think it's kind of the same thing working at 988. I do see it, because I'm looking for it also.
That's right.
And I see something in the news, so I'm focused on that. So it has been around. I've been doing it for 20 years. It was 1-800-SUICIDE before it was 988.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
The Lifeline number. Yeah, now I still see those signs up. I live near Rutgers University, and they haven't taken those down.
But it'll come through either way.
Yeah, exactly. So I know it's available.
Yeah, so even people that are going by the old way. I also want to say that in New Jersey, they're having a hard time getting it together and getting it up and running. But we're being trained right now where, as we're filling out a report, if we think that this person could use a crisis intervention, we talk to the person about it, and then we actually can hook them up kind of like a three-way, that it'll go right to it does not involve the police unless there is a weapon, or there's a whole list of what might need to be, so that they keep pushing back the start. We thought it was going to start 2 months ago, and it'll be on kind of a a limited basis to begin with, like Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but then they're hoping to get it around the clock. And also with the money that they mentioned in that video, they have been able to hire, they basically hired some of our volunteers to work like 20 hours a week, so that we really have good coverage now. But I must say that since it went 988, it's constant.
Okay.
And also I talk to people with IDD all the time. A lot of them are regular callers.
Okay.
And I talk to them just as if I was talking to somebody else. I kind of sense, where they're at.
Yeah.
And, and then I might ask them some questions if I don't know them that well. But I don't think it hurts to have training in every type of, individual that's out there, obviously. So.
Well, I can't believe that we lucked out on having you on this webinar. I mean, oh my God. Thank you for coming to the webinar. And I guess my question for you is, do you think it would be helpful to have something like a one-pager fact sheet for people with IDD around calling 988, what they can expect?
Absolutely.
And maybe we'll talk to you.
No, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out to me. I think, everybody needs training, no matter what. And the other groups that, have been highlighted, like the veterans and the LGBTQ community,
Yeah.
Those started with other hotlines, and then they've all kind of come in together. So, we're
There is a
kind of
DBD
trained to-
hotline for that
sorry?
matter. So for people who are already clients, there is a hotline. So I imagine that's one of the resources that's available to you to refer people
And
to.
where we are in Union County, we answer the hotline, but we also have a warm line, so people know that they can call us just to check in. Sometimes people are lonely or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
it's through that where I have a lot of people calling with IDD.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, for all of that information. We will definitely be following up with you.
Okay, great. No, I'm happy to.
Yeah, so it's just that was really lucky to have you on the webinar, definitely. I know that Bianca is on this call as well, and she's the trainer for our program. And it's just, we do have some mental health first aid trainings, and we do have like online dating and looking out for red flags and things like that, where we have mentioned 988, and a lot of places that we've done these trainings for, which are specifically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, have not heard of 988. So this was definitely something that we wanted to get out there and have available so people can learn that it is an option. I know that there are other programs that are in action with law enforcement, like the Blue Envelope program and things like that. But I think it is important for when you want the option for the police to not be involved and maybe just someone to talk to or get some, advice on a crisis that you're going through. I think this is really important. So I'm just happy that I'm super thankful that you could be here to do this webinar for us and talk about, this really important hotline that I really would love more people to hear about. So again, if anyone does think of any other questions after the webinar is over, feel free to reach out. I'll put our email address in the chat as well, but if you registered for this webinar, you can also access that on our website. This webinar is being recorded, and so it will be posted on our website once it is available, along with the handouts and the video that we watched today, so you'll have all of this information. And again, just thank you so much, Leigh Anne. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Erica, for being here and for doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great year.
Happy New
Thank
Year.
you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.